are many detractors and skeptics and people that think that it was basically a hoax or a fabrication.
Patterson-Gimlin film is the most compelling photographic evidence for the existence of Sasquatch.
But tonight, using breakthrough video technology, you will see it in a clarity never before attained.
Gets up, straightens himself out, and that's where he was able to capture that film.
Grok AI just confirmed China's Bigfoot is real. And what it found inside the government's classified archive is terrifying. 300 witnesses, a secret government expedition, physical evidence collected, then sealed. For 50 years, the world was told there was nothing to find. Grok AI just found it, and you need to hear what it says. Before we get to what the AI discovered, you need to understand what the Yeren actually is. The Yeren translates directly as wild man. It is China's Bigfoot, and it is not a fringe legend. It is one of the most systematically documented cryptid cases in the world, almost entirely because the Chinese government treated it as a legitimate scientific question. Beginning in the 1950s, provincial authorities in Hubei, Sichuan, and Shanxi began collecting formal eyewitness reports. By 1977, the volume of testimony was significant enough that the Chinese Academy of Sciences authorized a full field investigation. A dedicated research society was established. Scientists went into the Shennongjia forest, one of the most remote and least explored regions on Earth, with equipment, with budgets, with institutional backing. The Shennongjia forest covers roughly 3,200 square kilometers of near vertical terrain in central China. Elevations shift from 400 meters to over 3,000 meters within a few miles. Large sections have never been formally surveyed. The forest was only opened to limited outside researchers in the 1990s. Significant portions remain restricted to this day. The expeditions collected physical evidence, hair samples, footprint casts, fecal material, multiple specimens of each, cataloged, submitted for analysis. This was not amateur investigation. This was state-level scientific inquiry, conducted by credentialed researchers, operating under government authorization. And then, in the early 1980s, without a final report, without a press conference, without an official explanation of any kind, the program quietly ended. Here's what doesn't make sense. You don't build a multi-year government research program, collect hundreds of physical samples, file 400 sighting reports, and shut the whole thing down without publishing a single finding. Unless what you found was something you weren't prepared to explain. Here's the detail that has haunted the Yeren researchers for decades. The thing that was always visible, always documented, but never taken seriously by the institutions with the power to act on it. The footprints. Over the course of the 1977 to 1980 expeditions, field teams documented and cast more than 1,000 individual footprints across 7 separate locations in the Shennongjia forest. The casts are still in existence. Some have been examined by outside researchers, on the rare occasions when access has been permitted. And every serious analyst who has looked at them has noted the same thing. The morphology is wrong for a bear, wrong for a known primate, and wrong for a human. The stride pattern indicates a biped with a leg length significantly exceeding any documented human population in the region. The dermal ridge patterns, visible in the best preserved casts, do not match any animal in the Chinese zoological record. A wildlife biologist attached to a research group in central China reviewed the cast photographs in 2019. She described the stride data as inconsistent with every bipedal species currently recognized in this ecosystem. She submitted a request to examine the original physical casts. The request was denied. The archive, she was told, was not accessible for independent review. Pay attention to this part. A government archive containing physical evidence, collected during a state-authorized scientific expedition, was denied to an independent researcher. Not lost, not destroyed. Denied. The evidence exists. It is being held. And for 40 years, nobody with the institutional authority to demand access has pushed hard enough to get it. That changes when you give an AI the task of finding every document those institutions allowed to become public, and ask it to read between the lines. The standard explanation for the Yeren, the one that mainstream science settled on and has defended ever since. is misidentification. Witnesses saw bears or macaques, or in the most dismissive version, they saw nothing at all. This explanation has a problem. 300 people in a 72-hour window is not social contagion. The 1976 Hubei sighting cluster involved witnesses who were geographically separated. They had no communication with each other before submitting their reports, and they described consistent physical characteristics. Upright stance, estimated height between 6 and 8 feet, reddish-brown body hair, and a gait that multiple witnesses independently described as heavier and slower than a human walk, but clearly bipedal. The bear misidentification theory collapses against a different problem. The Asian black bear, the only large Ursid native to the Shennongjia region, does not walk upright for sustained distances. It rears up briefly in defensive or foraging situations. The witnesses were not describing bear behavior. Field researchers who raised this point during the original investigation were told to focus on sample collection rather than behavioral analysis. But here's the thing. The researchers who fed the government documents into Grok AI weren't looking to prove the witnesses right or wrong. They were asking a different question entirely. They wanted to know why the program ended when it did. Not whether the Yeren exists, but why the people tasked with finding out stopped looking. The analysis took 11 days. Grok AI processed every publicly available document connected to the Chinese government's Yeren investigation. Field reports, administrative records, meeting minutes from the research society, published papers by scientists involved in the expeditions, and crucially, a set of internal provincial government communications, partially declassified in 2003, largely ignored, because they were written in technical bureaucratic Chinese that required specialist translation. A researcher working with the team, a linguist affiliated with a translation institute in Beijing, described reviewing the AI's initial output. She said she read the first summary twice, then asked her colleague to read it independently and tell her if he saw what she was seeing. He did. Here's what the AI found. Buried inside 3 separate administrative documents from 1981, filed in the months immediately following the program's closure, were references to a 4th category of physical evidence. Not hair samples, not footprint casts, not fecal material. A 4th category. The documents referenced it obliquely, using a bureaucratic classification code, which the AI cross-referenced against other government scientific archives from the same period. That code, in every other context where it appeared, corresponded to biological tissue samples. Soft tissue, not hair, not bone, organic cellular material. Think about what that means. If the expedition teams collected soft tissue samples, the analysis of those samples would have produced results that no footprint cast or hair sample could deliver. DNA. And whatever the genetic analysis showed was classified under a tier that the AI identified as typically reserved for findings with national security implications. The research team sat with that finding for 2 days before sharing it. One of the researchers, a zoologist who had spent years working on primate taxonomy in Southeast Asia, later said that what disturbed her most wasn't the classification tier. It was the timing. The soft tissue samples were logged in late 1979. The program was shut down in 1981. 18 months. Long enough to run analysis, long enough to get results, long enough to decide that the results could not be made public. But that wasn't the most significant thing the AI found. Not even close. The research team made one additional request of the AI. They asked it to run the same documentary analysis on government records from 3 other countries. The Soviet Union's investigation of the Almas in Mongolia, conducted through the 1960s and 70s. The Vietnamese government's inquiry into the Ngoi Rung, and a set of internal Himalayan Regional Authority documents relating to Yeti expeditions in the 1950s. The AI returned the same structural pattern in all 4 cases. Official investigation. Physical evidence collected. Program terminated without published findings. Archive sealed or access restricted. And in each case, the termination occurred within 2 to 3 years of the same point in the process. The point at which biological sample collection had moved beyond hair and footprint material into something more direct. something that could produce a genetic result. 4 countries, 4 separate investigations, 4 programs that ended at the same stage of the same process. That is not coincidence. That is not independent bureaucratic inertia. That is a pattern. And patterns have explanations. The Grok AI analysis has not been officially published. The researchers are working through verification. 2 of the team members have declined to be named publicly. The archive in Hubei is still sealed. The soft tissue samples, if they still exist, have never been examined by an independent laboratory. The footprint casts sit in government storage, accessible to no one outside the institution that collected them. Somewhere in that archive is a classification document filed in 1981. It lists a category of physical evidence collected from the Shennongjia forest. Evidence that triggered a national security classification. Evidence that ended a government research program and silenced the scientists who ran it. Grok AI found the document's fingerprint in the bureaucratic record. What it couldn't find was the document itself, because that document was never declassified. It was sealed before the outside world knew it existed, and it has been sealed ever since. The question isn't whether the Yeren is real. The question is what the Chinese government found in 1979. That made them decide the world wasn't supposed to know. Stay tuned.